Hello. It's been a while. Listen, this video is nominally about the cards menu in NGU Idle. That's correct. But for those of you who don't know, it's been a long time since my last upload on NGU Idle, and I went out on a bit of a sour note. I genuinely really enjoyed the game all the way through normal mode, and really fell in love with it. And evil mode really disappointed me. I couldn't make positive videos about evil mode, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So, I made much more ranty videos. Logically speaking, I still stand by the points I made in those videos fiercely, but I think I did make a big mistake. I played up my anger for the camera, and that didn't really land super well, not only because, to be honest, it wasn't all that funny or entertaining, definitely in hindsight, but more importantly, to people who aren't familiar with who I am and my real opinions on this game, it could leave them feeling a little attacked. I'm obviously relatively small, so I can't pretend it was severe or anything, but I was pretty surprised to see that I got a bit of backlash for making those videos on evil mode. They are some of the most disliked videos I've ever released on my channel, even if the dislike ratio is still slightly positive. And I did get messages from some fans of the game that were unhappy with the video. They weren't necessarily attacking me back, and they mostly seemed sympathetic once we talked. But yeah, a lot of people weren't really super happy with my videos on evil difficulty. So I do want to start by apologizing for the cringy, over-the-top, forcing my anger presentation of the video. I'll be honest, I genuinely didn't know how else to approach the video, and even as I was making it, I kind of knew this angry format wasn't the best, but just didn't really know what else I wanted to do. It was a lot easier to know how I wanted to do these videos when I was a lot more enthusiastic about the game and genuinely enjoying it. I suppose in hindsight, the best thing probably was just to dryly commentate on exactly why the mechanics aren't great. I just thought that might come off as pretty boring. All that being said, I still stand by logically every point I made. And I still stand by what I said in that video. The evil really killed my love for the game. Not that that means the game is now bad in retrospect, but I will say this. I think part of the reason why I was so disappointed with evil difficulty is I heard a lot of talk of this idea that, oh yeah, when you play normal, oh you've just scratched the surface, you've barely even begun to see what the game's really about, just wait until you get into evil difficulty, that's when the game really begins. And obviously, that kind of excited me. I wanted to see what evil difficulty had to offer. But I honestly think that was a really bad way to be introduced to it. If I was going to talk to a new player to NGU Idle now, I would tell them that, hey, if you just want to experience the game and the best it has to offer, just play normal difficulty. What I would want them to understand is that evil and sadistic difficulty are kind of poorly labeled post-game content. They basically exist so that you have a reason to keep grinding, but they don't really do anything to make the game feel different or more engaging, at least not really. They are mostly just milestones for the sake of reaching milestones. I tried to communicate this in my initial video, but I think still it doesn't really land with some people. I recognize that this is an idle game. Just grinding is part of the idle game, I get that. But the whole reason why I fell in love with NGU Idle was because in normal difficulty, I found it to be the single most skill-rewarding and engaging idle game I had ever played. The game which gave you the most reward for active play and actually figuring out how to abuse the game's mechanics to their fullest extent. So that yes, you can always just beat the game by waiting forever. But if you actually want to play the game, experience something, engage with the mechanics, you can speed up the process with your skill consistently. Once you reach evil difficulty though, that kind of gets thrown out the window. From here on out, the game for the most part is just a bog standard idle game, where you sit and you wait and you grind resources to hit buttons that make numbers go up. And hey, if you're fine with that, if you want to keep going, then keep going. But if you are here because you wanted to find as many cool, unique mechanics that change the way you thought about this game as possible, then do yourself a favor and stop at normal. You've experienced basically everything the game has to offer. All it has for you now is milestones that basically arbitrarily exist to give you reasons to keep grinding. I think I would be a lot less frustrated if I knew that's what I was getting into with evil difficulty and onward. And I think that's part of the reason why, even though Sadistic on an objective level is quote-unquote even worse, even though Sadistic only has one new menu, which even then is a joke menu, which barely does anything, even though Sadistic has almost no challenge rewards programmed for almost every challenge in the game, even though Sadistic makes the progression even slower than it was in Evil mode, Sadistic mode didn't annoy me. It bored me a little, I guess, but I never really felt passionately angry or disappointed with Sadistic. And I think it's just because by this point, I was just over it. I finally come to accept this is just what the game is now, and I guess that's okay. It's just not what I fell in love with. But then, to be fair, there was another reason I persisted through a lot of this. I wanted to see the cards menu. I tried to mostly avoid looking up spoilers ahead of time. I mean, still, I haven't seen what the final boss is, and I intend to keep it that way. However, there were times where it was a little difficult to use the wiki to figure out what I was supposed to do at certain points or how to abuse certain mechanics without accidentally catching a glimpse of something that might appear in the future. And one thing that caught my eye straight away was that one of the last menus I would unlock was the cards menu. And while I had the option to keep it a secret, I was so intrigued I had to take a peek. It was the only menu I really took a good look at ahead of time before I really unlocked it. As early as the 5th Titan, I was eyeing up that menu thinking, ooh, that looks good. And for all those years I was thinking, this looks like the coolest menu in the game. I can't wait to get my hands on it. And well, did it deliver? Okay, I take no pleasure in being harsh, so let me start with the important positive things to establish. The cards menu is easily the best menu in Evil difficulty. That's a low bar, but it definitely smashes it. The cards menu also thankfully fixes the progression for literally the rest of the entire game. Basically every single day, once you unlock the cards menu, it will provide you with a boost to your progression that, while not particularly sizable in most cases, is enough to notice some kind of difference, and it does so in a fashion that doesn't hit diminishing returns quickly. As a result, the cards menu basically makes sure that the progression of the game doesn't break. If you just cast enough cards and wait enough time, you will always find a way to push forward using the cards menu. And that helps a lot. The other thing I can really appreciate it is that even just from a glance before I really understood how it worked, I knew that this menu was setting up a lot of convoluted mechanics that could be some great building blocks for some really interesting decision making down the line. And that's true. There is a lot going on to the cards menu. This might be the most explanation I'll need to do for any menu in the game. However, this is where we have to get to my main complaint about the menu. It feels like the cards menu does all the hard work to set up an extremely complicated but effective set of building blocks for an extremely in-depth, skill-rewarding menu that leaves you with lots of opportunities for thoughtful decision, and then just kind of does jack shit with it. I'm going to be honest with you, the cards that you get in the cards menu are extremely straightforward and underwhelming, and there's so many mechanics that have so much potential for depth that just never have anything done with them. I still wouldn't call the cards menu outright bad, but it just feels like a massive waste of potential. It easily could have lived up to my expectations, it easily could have been the coolest menu in the game, but as it is, I don't know, it's just kind of okay. When you unlock the cards menu, every single hour you will generate a card that will go into your deck, which to begin with will be quite small, although you can increase the size of it over time through things like perks or AP purchases. The card will grant a stat bonus, which stat is random, and the different stats you can get is almost every stat in the game, including things like wish speed and hack speed. Casting cards costs a brand new resource exclusive to the cards menu, Mayo. It takes 1 hour to generate 1 Mayo, but of course it can't be that simple. There isn't just one kind of Mayo, there's 6 types. There is Angry Mayo, Sad Mayo, Moldy Mayo, Ayla Mayo, Cinco de Mayo, and Pretty Mayo. These randomized cards could cost any combination of any number of those different types of Mayo, and if you don't have the right amounts of the right colors, then you can't cast the card. However, unfortunately, when you start out with the cards menu, your Mayo generator is only capable of generating Mayo for 1 Mayo type at a time, so you have to manually switch between Mayo types to start generating a different sort of Mayo. In the meantime, you're probably going to be running out of deck space, filling up with cards that you can't afford to cast or you might not even want to cast. So you're going to have to start yeeting cards looking for better ones. Yeeting cards simply gets rid of them without getting any kind of bonus effect. Now when you cast a card, the more expensive it is, the more rewards you get, But on top of that, the ratio of cost spent to reward gotten is better if the card is of a higher rarity. As well as that, cards have tiers which you can upgrade through things like wishes and perks and quirks. And those tiers essentially act like multipliers that increase the benefit of casting cards of that type. For example, you can get a perk that increases the tier of all PP cards, and then from then on out, every single time you get a PP card, its tier will be increased, causing it to give more reward for when you cast it. As well as that, there's a tagging system you can unlock, where if you are not getting cards of the type you want, you can tag a certain type of card that you want more of, and it will give you a percentage chance of converting cards that don't match that type into the type you want. There's multiple points at which you'll be able to buy upgrades to increase the chance of the tag effect triggering, and you can buy more tag slots over time to enable more types of cards to be converted into. For example, if you have 4 tag slots and you know what you're interested in, you might decide to make it so that any card that isn't QP, PP, hack speed, or wish speed is to be converted into one of those 4 types, if you have 4 tag slots. You might notice the protect as well, but there's not much to say here. If there's a card that is super valuable that you don't want to get rid of, and you're scared you might accidentally get rid of it or cast it, you can simply put it in a protected mode, which makes it so that it cannot be casted or yeeted away until you decide to unprotect it. For the most part, that's about it. There's a couple interesting consumables you can get, which can increase your Mayo generation speed temporarily, or increase the tier of cards using a pen, but for the most part, you don't really use those a whole bunch, just because they are consumables that cost AP, and they don't really give a permanent benefit, especially because even once you have all the permanent benefits you want, you still kind of want to use AP on buying Omega potions to double the power of your resources. You don't usually have the AP to spare to buy these consumables, even if they're not particularly weak. Now, more mechanics are added to the menu over time, but honestly, not a lot more. Probably the best one is the recycling mechanic, which when fully upgraded, allows you to not only get a time refund, but also a Mayo refund for yeeting cards. It's always partial, it's never a full refund, but it can allow you to throw away multiple bad cards to effectively get a reroll for something that might be a better card, all while getting a little bit of Mayo along the way. Although, unfortunately, the cost of the card has absolutely no bearing on how much Mayo you get. It's always the same amount, and same goes for the time refund. In fact, even if you have a situation where, say you have a card that costs 8 sad Mayo and 1 angry Mayo, and you want to top up your sad Mayo because it's low, you might yeet it thinking you're going to get 20% sad Mayo, but there's still a chance it just gives you 20% angry Mayo and no sad Mayo, just because there was 1 angry Mayo in there. Which I will say is a mechanic I'm not the biggest fan of. The recycling mechanic in general, though, is pretty cool. It's just a shame that the reward for recycling cards isn't really big enough for it to be a big consideration. The main thing it changes is it just kind of moves where the floor is, of where you decide that a card isn't worth it anymore. You might be less willing to put up with subpar cards once you've got the opportunity to recycle them for some resources. But there's rarely going to be very many moments where you really look at a card and you're like, ooh, do I recycle this or not? Especially when every single card gives the exact same thing for being recycled. Later into the game, you'll also unlock the ability to get chonker cards, which are kind of just what they sound like. Giant cards that cost way more than the normal cards and give much larger benefits. However, they take ages to generate, literally multiple days, and eventually you'll even get the ability to get a bonus to recycling if you recycle them specifically. Chonkers are nice and all, but they're still basically just big cards, you know, they don't really change the way you use cards that much. They're just kind of like a cool thing that happens every now and then. Much later down the line, you'll also find wishes that can increase the maximum and minimum costs of both normal cards and chonkers. And that's about it in terms of how the menu develops over time, and that's kind of why I'm disappointed with it. There are so many aspects of this menu that feel like they have so much potential, but just don't really go anywhere. Like, okay, let's just start with the elephant in the room. I kind of hate that we had to skip over this, but I didn't want to get caught in the weeds before even explaining how the menu worked. I understand that we're cribbing Magic the Gathering a little bit here, with the land system kind of being like the Mayo system, but serious question, why are there 6 different types of Mayo? I originally expected this would work similarly to how it does in Magic the Gathering or Eternal, where cards that cost a certain kind of resource are more likely to specialize in certain attributes. Like, for example, in Eternal, which is kind of my card game of choice out of those two, when you play sigils to gain resources, you can play fire sigils to get fire cards played, or time sigils to get time cards played, and they specialize in different things. The time faction usually has access to better long-term value tools, whereas the fire faction and usually has better access to burst damage and high attack units that die very quickly. Similarly, I thought this would translate into NGU Idle. I thought that you would be more likely to get certain types of cards if they cost certain kinds of mayo, and so you would be incentivized to focus certain types of mayos at some times and other types at other times. Instead, it turns out that the mayo cost of a card is completely random every time and has absolutely zero bearing on what the card does. In other words, other than to reference Magic the Gathering, there is literally no reason that there are 6 different types of mayo except to make it take longer to get the cards you want, because you constantly have to manually switch the mayo generator when you're early in the game and you don't have as many mayo generators active. There is basically no reason mayo couldn't have just been one resource instead of 6 different resources that all do the same thing. That's already kind of a shame. But as well as that, I'll be honest, when I saw the cards menu, just taking a peek at it, I kind of expected that cards would be like, you know, actual cards. As in, different cards would have different effects. I mean, I kind of understood the cards were going to be randomly generated, but I think there's still randomly generate effects you could do. I didn't think every card was just going to be, here's a stat, give more of that stat. Even when I first got the menu, I still lived in denial for a bit that maybe it's just like this at the beginning, but then I unlock new kinds of cards. Maybe eventually there'd be cards where, let's say, I have to lose one of my beard slots for this rebirth to get a boost to one of my mayo resources. Maybe there would be cards that make me have to take a stat penalty on one stat to get a larger stat boost on another stat. Maybe there would even be cards that allow me to swap the amount of boosts I have on one stat with the amount of boosts I have on another stat. Maybe there would be cards that would allow me to convert blood to mayo. Maybe there would be cards that increase the tier of the next card played, but they themselves don't do anything when first casted. Hopefully you get the point. I was really hoping there would be cards that actually affect other cards or other mechanics in the game. I was really hoping it wouldn't just be, here's a bunch of stat boosts that you have to generate mayo to unlock. But that's kind of just what the menu was. You know, when I did my video critiquing Evil difficulty, there was a point that I briefly considered adding in at the last minute, but I glazed over it. I already kind of brushed on this point gently, kind of by accident while making my arguments in the video, but I never really directly addressed it. And at the time I decided not to, not only because I was already basically done with the video and it was already long enough, but also because at the time I thought, it's another point to add onto the pile, but it's not really one of the most important reasons why I didn't like Evil mode. But honestly, the more time I've had to stew on it, I think this is actually the biggest reason I didn't like Evil mode. In normal mode, every single different menu in the game, for the most part, interacts with each other. Choosing which digger slots to activate could affect the Beards menu, the NGU menu, the Wandu's menu. In turn, the Beards menu could affect the Diggers menu, with the amount of gold it provided through the Time Machine menu, and its effect through the Golden Beard. But also it could affect the Wandu's menu itself. Of course, all of this could also be affected by MacGuffin effects as well, and for the most part, to the exclusion of basically just the quests menu, almost every single new addition and mechanic introduced in normal mode has this massive interlocking web of dominoes that fall whenever you make a decision. There isn't just, oh, I switched this one bigger off and it changed this one thing in this one menu, because that then has trickle-down effects that affect other menus, to the point where everything is an interesting web of decisions. You actually have to consider multiple different factors, and there's a lot more situations where there can be nuance and context to consider when considering what is the most valuable thing you want to focus. But then, once you get far enough into the game, eventually all these old menus start to become more and more irrelevant, and as they do, the new menus take over. And they don't have the same level of interlocking complexity. Not only do they basically not interact with the older menus that were the bread and butter of the peak of the game to begin with, but they barely even interact with themselves. I mean, they kind of do, but only in the most shallow ways. You can get boost to wish speed in the hack menu. You can get boost to hack speed in the wish menu. You can get boost to mayo generation speed in the wish menu for the cards menu. You get the point, stuff like that. But considering a lot of those are just one and done, you buy it and you get the reward permanently, it's not really the same as something like managing digger slots or beard slots. I think that's why the cards menu just disappointed me so much. Like, don't get me wrong, it's still the best menu in Evil mode, but even the best menu in Evil mode can't really do that much, when Evil mode only has 3 menus, and those 3 menus barely interact with each other or affect each other at all, while also making almost every menu before them nearly completely obsolete. In that way, this is why I dislike the post-game, so to speak, the beyond normal mode of NGU Idle, because even though it adds more menus and more buttons, It erases complexity. And the most frustrating part is, they are lying on a goldmine of potential complexity, but they refuse to use it. I guess that's just why evil mode leaves me so frustrated. Even then, I'm saying this as I'm already 2/3 of the way through Sadistic at this point. In fairness, even though you unlock the cards menu in evil mode towards the end, it feels more like a Sadistic mode unlock. I mean, for one, it's basically the only thing that consistently drives forward progression in Sadistic mode, so that's pretty important. But beyond that, almost every interesting thing you get in Sadistic mode is just the stuff that improves the cards menu. It's things like chonkers and recycling and such. So considering almost all the effectiveness of the cards menu is used in the Sadistic mode part of the game, and that almost all the interesting parts of Sadistic mode are the ways in which it buffs the cards menu, it feels more like a cards menu thing. That's my segue into basically saying this video is also doubling as a Sadistic mode video. And for that reason, I am going to quickly tack on to the end the cooking menu. The final menu in the game you will unlock for defeating the first Titan in Sadistic difficulty, It Hungers. You might think, whoa, that's ambitious, you're going to cover a second whole menu in this video that's already as long as it is? But for those who don't know, the cooking menu is more of a joke than anything else. I originally thought this was intentional and just a strange trolley decision, but actually, as it turns out, if you can remember all the way back to the first Titan in the game, Gordon Ramsay Bolton, and how he had a full set of items that had a cooking stat boost, which didn't appear to do anything. I looked on the wiki to find out why that was, and found out that it's to buff this menu. And I remembered thinking to myself it was a little strange that the first Titan in the game gives you equipment that boosts a stat that doesn't even matter until the literal end of the game. However, it turns out the reason for that wasn't just to troll you, although it does do that now in hindsight. Apparently, while the game was still actively being developed, and before the cooking menu existed, the cooking stat still existed from the beginning, and it was kind of an intentional joke that it just didn't do anything. Apparently, it was an in-joke for a while that eventually the cooking menu was going to be added so that we could finally do something with the cooking stat. And well, that's how the cooking menu came to be. Basically just an in-joke of, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we actually added a cooking menu? But then you might be wondering, okay, so what do you do in it? Well, you don't do a lot. You're provided a set of 6 ingredients. You can mash in random numbers of amounts of ingredients to put in, and depending on combinations of numbers, you might get a good meal or a bad meal. You basically just mash different numbers until you figure out what gives you a good number, and you can either keep mashing until you find the perfect combination, or, because that's boring and takes forever, you can just keep going until you get a good enough number and then just eat it and take the bonus. Depending on how good the meal is, you will get a permanent boost to your EXP gain, which is okay, I guess. You can only eat 1 meal per day, and although you only start with 6 ingredients, you can eventually get 8. The only other quirk to keep in mind is the more cooking stat boosts that you have, the more XP boost you will get from eating meals. However, the number is completely cosmetic. Just having an item with a cooking stat boost on it, regardless of what the number says, provides a flat stat boost, and literally no matter how high or low the number is, it always provides the same stat boost. It's just there for the memes. In fact, apparently it's even bugged, as if you put it in the second weapon slot you unlock halfway through evil difficulty, it won't actually recognize that you have a cooking stat boost there and you don't get the benefit. I could pretend to have an opinion on this menu, but like, come on. This is literally a menu where you mash random buttons until you get a good number, and then you eat it and you get a stat boost. Like, I'm not even mad at it, but it just feels like the game finally giving up the ghost and going, okay, yeah, we've abandoned all notions of trying to add interesting or skill rewarding mechanics. At this point, we accept that every new menu is just mashing buttons to get stat boosts, and that's just how the game is now. I say that as if I'm mad at it, I'm not even really. I accepted that's what the game is now, so to some extent I almost appreciate the honesty. But yeah, there's just not a lot to say about the cooking menu. It mostly exists to complete the meme and finally put it to rest. With all that said, I did make it this far, didn't I? So as much as I'm not pleased with the current state of the game, and I do think I probably should have just stopped playing at normal difficulty, I'm now in the final stretch. I have recently defeated the 11th Titan, Rock Lobster, and I am finally coming for the final Titan, Titan number 12, at the end of Sadistic difficulty. I don't know what happens at the end of the game, and I don't want to know before you tell me, but I assume it'll be something video-worthy at the very least. Whether it's a shorter video or a longer video, we'll see. But you guys do at least deserve closure on this game. With all that said, as close as we are, obviously the pace of the game slows down a lot at this point, And probably one of the only reasons why it hasn't felt like it's been dragging is because I've not really been paying attention to it until now. Now I'm kind of having the curse of, because I'm so close to the end, I'm paying more attention to it, and because I'm paying more attention to it, it feels like it's going much slower. So I'm not sure how soon it will be when I finally get to that last Titan, but hopefully it won't be too long. And when that day comes, I will see you in that final NGU Idol video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.